Hello and welcome to
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, there you go.
There you go.
Hey, good afternoon. This is Attorney Paul Rebein, and welcome to the Call for Help show. Here today with my co-hosts Robin Lockett and Pastor Brenda Fruster. How are you doing today?
We're doing great.
Thank you.
Today's topic is a continuation of last week because a lot of things happened this week that relate to it. The topic is the Tampa Police Department's so-called crime-free housing program. And we are honored again this week to have Christopher O'Donnell, the reporter from the Tampa Bay Times, who broke this story as our guest. Christopher, welcome to the Call for Help show.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.
Just to recap, this program that's been in effect since 2013, but really wasn't brought to light until recently, is a program where the Tampa Police Department partners up with certain apartment complexes to do a program where the apartment complexes get tenants to sign addendums to their lease agreeing that they can be evicted if they engage in criminal activity or a member of their family or a guest engages in criminal activity. And then the police department provides notices to the landlords whenever tenants are arrested. The Tampa Bay Times and Christopher O'Donnell dug into this story and found that basically it was being applied primarily to African Americans. In fact, 90% of the 1,100 people flagged in the program were African Americans. So great work, Christopher. But then I know the mayor has responded to your article and made some changes to the program or proposed them. And then the city council had a meeting where it was discussed in great detail. So let's start with the mayor. Christopher, what's your understanding what the mayor has said about this program and the changes that she proposed to it?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, the story published Wednesday of last week online, and the plan was to publish it Sunday in the Tampa Bay Times newspaper. On Saturday, the city sent out a press release where basically Castor announced some reforms to the program. So now every letter that is sent to a landlord is going to be reviewed by a captain. They're only going to send letters in the cases of certain felonies, like violent felonies and some drug charges. And they're not going to send letters in cases where a tenant is arrested in another part of the city. All of those things we found were happening in the program throughout its 8-year history. But those are the reforms that Castor has announced. I know that like the local NAACP group, for example, feels that hasn't gone far enough, and those reforms don't address the disparate effect on the Black community that this program has had, and they also don't address the fact that these letters are sent based on arrests, not based on convictions. So a family, in theory, can still be evicted for an arrest, and that charge could later be dropped. But the damage has already been done.
Yeah.
And Robin, you were at the city council meeting. Tell us what happened.
Oh, that was that process was very, very interesting. There are tenants from different apartments. I think River Oaks apartment and I think Robus Park were allegedly brought in. The police officers gave them a ride to the city council meeting. But the tenants that were there, they primarily talked about, just being safe in their community, right? That they didn't want the police department to be taken away or the police to be taken away. My question has always been, well, if whether this program is in place or not, the police would have still make those the police department would still make those arrests, whether the program is there or not. So because or does the program allow the police to be on that site more? I'm not sure, right?
Yeah.
But it was a lot of back and forth. City council initially heard from the chief of the police department. He did a presentation. Then they opened it up for public comments. The public comments included myself, just a array of people. ACLU presented something, an outline of what their training process is, the information that they train with. That was disturbing. The city council came back to ask the chief more questions. They gave the chief, I think, until December the 2nd or 4th to bring back the things that was asked for him to bring back in regards to numbers. Carlson was real heavy on, what's the end result? What are the numbers? How can you, what are you calculating this by? How are you getting your numbers? So it was interesting.
Okay, Christopher, a couple of questions. Does the city council, as you understand it, have any authority to change or get rid of this program?
That's an interesting question, Paul. The program was started by TPD with no community discussion whatsoever.
Right.
Unlike in other cities that have adopted this program, which did it through an ordinance and they applied it citywide, in TPD in the early years of the program, they invited landlords to join the program. So they selected which communities, which apartment complexes were enrolled, and it's almost been done as an operational practice as opposed to a policy. So there is a question, like a legal question, of what power city council has here. I'm sure that if they pass an ordinance, they could probably suspend it or abolish it, but not being a lawyer, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Well, that's interesting. To me, that was one of the things that immediately jumped out. Is like, why are we doing this with some apartments but not others? So if I live in one area and my kid, say, commits vandalism at the complex or whatever the crime was, I could get evicted. But if I live across the street or in a different neighborhood, my landlord may never even hear about it and I might be able to stay. It just doesn't seem like it's being fairly applied to me. If we're going to have something like this, it should apply equally in a wealthy neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. It's like people need to be treated the same, no matter where you live or what neighborhood or apartment complex you live in.
So kind of in regards to the Achilles heel in this is evictions. So in no neighborhood should there be a persuasion or a suggestion for somebody to be evicted based on something that another crime that someone else commits.
Right.
That part there is crazy to me.
It seems like they're trying to punish, make part of the punishment be that, you might lose your place to live. And I just question, what good is that in terms of punishment or deterrence? It's like, okay, well, you're going to be punished if you're convicted of the crime, but why is your family going to be punished? And why is it helpful that now you don't have a place to live? Does that make you less likely to commit a crime in the future? It just seems like it's part of the punishment, and it really shouldn't be. If we're going to do it for housing, why not have the police notify your job? If somebody in your family was arrested, what if you could get fired for that? Would anybody think that was right? But to me, housing is equally important, and it's just unfair. Pastor Brenda, what are your thoughts about this program and the changes that they've made?
Well, I certainly think that the program is biased, but as you all were talking, um, I kind of my mind went back, and what happened was my family and I were living in a complex in a townhome in Carrollwood around 2014, 2015. Our grandson got into some trouble, some deep trouble. And next thing we know, we received a notice that we had to get out of this townhome. And I never thought anything about it. I never until now. We're faced with it in a different community, or I should say a different way. And so I think my point is we never know what it feels like until it hits home, until it actually comes to our home or our neighborhood. And I think the broader spectrum, as Robin said, is the bottom line is, why does someone else has to suffer off of another, whether it's a teenager or a drug addict's decision? Now I'm being evicted, and what I'm going to do when I get out there, because I can't find a place to stay, I'm going to rob or do something else. There has to be another solution, and it has to be all communities that this solution is brought to.
Absolutely. Now, Christopher, the mayor and others in the police department who have defended this program have said it works. Crime has fallen, or reports of serious crime, in these communities or apartment complexes have indeed fallen significantly since the implementation of the program. One of the statistics that I saw in some of the articles was 28%. Do we know that? How do we know that? And do we know that that can be attributed to this program, or maybe there just generally was less crime? Or what do we know about whether this program works or not?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question, Paul. So the 28% reduction in crime was at roughly 50 apartment complexes that were in the program for most of its lifespan. So at its peak, there was 100 apartment complexes in the program. The police gave us statistics for half of them. Their argument was that some of them had dropped out and others weren't in the program for long enough, or weren't fully certified as crime-free, the program's certification. We put those numbers in the story, but we attributed them to the police, because to get crime figures for an apartment complex, we can't do that with the data that we have available to us. So we compared that 28% reduction to the fall in crime citywide over the life of the program. And it was broadly the same. So across the whole city of Tampa, crime has fallen by about, I think it was 25, 26%. Which is pretty close to what they reported for the apartment complexes. So the question then is, is the reduction citywide because of this reduction at these apartment complexes, or was crime generally falling over the past few years, which I believe it was nationwide? But it's impossible, and the police have admitted it's impossible to say that this program is responsible for all of that reduction. That this program doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are lots of other crime initiatives going on. There are lots of other changes in demographics, changes in people's incomes. And so they definitely feel that it works. They're very, very adamant about that. But it's impossible to attribute the fall in crime completely to this program.
Yeah. It sounds like if crime generally decreased during this time period, 25%, in Tampa, and they're saying it decreased in these particular complexes by 28%. that's not a huge impact. I would think, but I guess the question now is, should we keep it? Should we keep this program? And I'd invite all of our listeners or viewers on Facebook Live. We are on Facebook Live, as we are also replaying this on WTMP. What do you think? Should we keep this program? Should we change it, or should we just get rid of it altogether?
So let me ask a quick question in regards to the reduction in crime. Because a year ago we were in a pandemic, so crime reduction, they talked about that. So how do they calculate that, and from what time period? Do they go based on if it's Robles Park Apartments? They do a yearly study, and they figure out what the crime was on December the 1st of one year, and then go to January, and then calculate it from there. Do they go apartment by apartment? So how do they calculate these numbers?
The numbers that they gave us, they used 2014 as a baseline. So they looked at the number of crime reports in 2014, and then they compared it to the number of crime reports in, I think it was 2020. So the 28% fall was like a baseline of 2014 versus 2020 numbers.
So I would be curious to know what the numbers would have been prior to the pandemic, right? What would those numbers be? Because during the pandemic, it's evident that crime went down. They talked about it thoroughly during that time. And because everyone was home, no one was out. So what would be the calculations, putting it backwards or going backwards, but prior to the pandemic, and what those numbers would be about? And decreasing crime, how? You're just doing what you do, and that's arresting someone. Right?
And is it really decreasing crime, or is it moving people who've been accused of crimes to a different neighborhood or a different apartment complex? But is that really reducing crime, or just moving people who've been accused of crimes?
They're going by the reports of crime. So when people are their car's broken into, or their house is broken into, or there's someone reports being assaulted in the street, they're going by number of reports of crime. It's not based on number of arrests. It's how many reported crimes there were.
Okay. One thing that I was thinking about, we're starting to see some comments. Thank you, Jana, for your comment. She says lower crime rates can also just mean lower reported crime. True, if crimes are happening but they're not being reported, then it's not going to show up in the statistics. But I think your reporting, Chris, was that a big participant in this was the Tampa Housing Authority. It's my understanding that if you are participating in public housing and you are evicted, that that will preclude you from participating in public housing, at another location. Is that your understanding, Chris?
That is my understanding. I believe they have like a 5-year window where you wouldn't be eligible for another public housing project.
So for a low income person or disabled person who really relies on this public housing or public assistance, this eviction is more than just you have to move somewhere else. It might preclude them from having a place to live, period. Exactly. And so even if there is a benefit, some sort of measurable reduction in crime, I think the thing that we need to decide as a community, is it worth it? Whatever benefit there might be, is it worth it if someone now becomes homeless, or it's. And I think, Chris, you talked about the lady in your story that lost her housing and ended up living in a motel or staying in a park. That's a significant consequence
Absolutely.
for something that doesn't seem to have a huge identifiable benefit.
And Paul, let's be clear about evictions, right? So an eviction is filed, right, for on a tenant. And let's say that tenant, most of the time, because with Florida Rising, we canvass communities looking for evictions. And when we got there, the person had already moved. So in our community, when someone is saying, hey, y'all need to get out, either verbally or by written notice, we're picking up and leaving. We're not fighting. We're not trying to, we don't know our rights.
Okay.
We don't know any of that stuff. But if a person does not, if they default on the eviction, meaning they don't reply to the notice in response, or they don't have the money down there, or they don't do something, they don't reply, that's an automatic default, and the judgment goes to the landlord. So that person does what? Although they're saying I'm leaving, they still have an eviction on their record.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yep. And to me, this also goes to the larger point of where we're punishing people beyond what is provided for in the criminal justice system. So in Florida, we like to punish, felons. Oh, you're a felon, so now you can't live here, or you can't get this type of public license, even though you did your time. It was a long time ago. You served your sentence, but we still continue to punish. And then, of course, as we know, and as been alleged in this case, we cannot look at it in a vacuum if there is a disparate impact on certain communities more than others. And I think, Chris, your reporting showed absolutely this program has a disparate impact on communities of color, African Americans, Hispanics. And so should that be a reason to get rid of it as well? I know that the NAACP and the ACLU sent this letter, and I think it makes good points. Do we know, has this ever been challenged in court in any of the other communities where it's been put in place?
It has been challenged by the ACLU in other parts of the US. But the ones that I'm aware of that have been challenged were cases where the city had an ordinance and it was applied citywide. Okay. I'm not aware of anywhere that have the same model as Tampa.
So you're saying we were just suggesting, hey, maybe it'd be better if it was an ordinance because it would get applied citywide, but maybe the reason they're not doing it as an ordinance is that because it's voluntary, then it's not being, you can't challenge it like you could challenge an ordinance that applies to everybody. Well, that's interesting. That would be interesting to see if that would be an impediment to.
Right. I want to explain, Paul. I did explain the model when I spoke to national experts on housing law. They still felt that this policy, as it exists, without a citywide ordinance, regardless, is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. It's a government policy that is having a disparate impact on people of color, as you know, and it's affecting housing. So they were pretty adamant that this would be a violation of the Fair Housing Act.
Interesting. One thing that really jumped out at me when I was reading the articles was the literature or presentation that they provided to landlords. And there was a slide that I know was talked about in the city council meeting saying the best way to kill a weed is to uproot it. And they had a picture, an image of somebody taking out a weed. Eviction serves that purpose. So it's kind of like, okay, these people are being viewed as weeds. That's is that what we want our government to think about people? Oh, they're like a weed. Let's uproot them. Let's get rid of them.
Oh my God, come on. Shoot, we could go. Now that's a topic right there by itself.
Yeah, and I don't want to bring up another topic, but it really, when I saw the images of how the Haitians were treated at the border
Yes,
this week, I just made me think that how people are viewed differently,
yes,
um,
yes.
and especially the how the media or people react to it differently, depending on who it is.
So,
Topic for
Yeah,
another day. We don't have time.
yeah, it is. But
so Chris,
that's
go
that
ahead.
for that reason I said we don't know the effect, the pain, the agony, the disgrace, the shame of what is happening until it hits your home. It is one thing to stand from afar and say they're pulling up that weed, making funny images of African Americans, Latinos, and but we don't see that happening on the other side. But then when it hits the other side, it's like poop hits the ceiling, and you like, dude, I've been trying to tell you it's happening in my neighborhood forever. What you gonna do?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing about that is it rarely hits the other side.
Yes,
They never experience the hardship that we go through. Chris, you said something that was interesting to me. The national organization that you spoke about and said that there was a violation of housing.
Yeah.
So since that organization has recognized that this is a possible violation of housing, are there next steps to that?
Well, the national experts I spoke to, so I included the legal counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. It included civil rights attorneys and low-income housing organizations. I don't know that they're going to take action on the behalf of the community here, but they're definitely looking at this. I think they'd be interested to see if there is legal action at a local level, but that's something I report on if it happens. I haven't heard of anything so far.
So I just have one more question. Yesterday, one of the, I think it was Connie Burton, to be factual, she suggested that the justice system comes in, just like they did with the bicycle incidents. What are your thoughts about that?
I can't. I can't give my opinion on
Oh,
that.
okay.
But I can say. Obviously, with the Viking Mile Black, the Justice Department had a problem and concerns about TPD's role. If they were to get involved in this, we'd obviously want to report it. But that's as far as I can really comment.
That's fair. That's fair.
That would be interesting, and to me, you can't really look at the two separately. I think they were both kind of. I don't remember when that program was started, but certainly it was when Mayor Castor was chief of police, or during that time period. And so when you look at those two together, it's like it seems to be targeted at minority communities. And Chris, did any of the people, did you happen to find out if any of the people who were sent notices were because of their child, or someone was stopped on a bike? Did you see any correlation between those two?
I did see one case where someone was ticketed on a bicycle and a letter was sent to the landlord, but I don't know what happened with that case.
Okay.
I think it was a juvenile, so the name was kept confidential. But on that whole point, like comparing the two programs, the Viking Mile Black was direct police action. They're actually issuing citations. This is a little bit more indirect, and maybe that I'm sure the Justice Department would bear that in mind if they do look at this program. It's not as direct as that program.
Yep. And there's a similar there's a program I know your publication has reported on in Pasco County where they're providing criminal information database on people who are engaging in criminal activity. Too, I think the schools are getting information from the schools, and the Justice Department is looking at that. So perhaps they'll look into this. But our time is coming to an end. It once again has gone very fast. Chris, I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show again. And thank you for your reporting.
Yes,
This is one of many significant issues that really I would not get covered without a publication like the Tampa Bay Times and reporters like yourself. And so I want to thank you for your work and let you know that it's making a difference in our community.
yes.
And we will catch you next week on the Call4Help show, and we will see you then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.